My name is Emily Carter. I am 34 years old. I live in Chicago, USA. For years, I worked quietly in the corporate world. I didn't beg for attention. I didn't play office politics. And because of that, they thought I was weak. That assumption cost them everything. Have you ever been overlooked at work? Ever shared an idea only to watch someone else take the credit? Ever been called a too quiet like it was a weakness? What if I told you the people who underestimated me gave me the perfect cover? What if every insult sharpened my focus? What if patience was my secret weapon? Do you believe the same executives who dismiss me later depended on my decisions? And what if my silence was never fear, but preparation? Stay till the end. Because their biggest mistake was doubting me. They mistook my calm for weakness, and that was the first crack in their foundation. I wasn't loud in meetings. I didn't interrupt people just to prove I existed. I didn't fight for attention like it was oxygen. I sat there, pen in hand, eyes forward, listening, and in their world, listening meant losing. To them, power belonged to the loudest voice in the room. They looked at me and decided I wasn't a threat. That assumption gave me something priceless: invisibility. When people think you're harmless, they stop hiding things from you. They speak freely. They make careless jokes. They reveal how they really think. I heard managers laugh about decisions that ruined careers. I watched executives promise one thing in meetings and do the opposite behind closed doors. I noticed who took credit, who shifted blame, and who panicked when pressure showed up. While they were busy performing confidence, I was studying behavior. They talked. I remembered. They rushed. I observed. They underestimated. I prepared. Every time someone spoke over me, I learned who felt insecure. Every time my idea was ignored and later repeated by someone else, I learned how credit really moved in that building. I learned that results mattered less than perception. That loyalty was temporary. That silence made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people make mistakes. I thought I was afraid to speak. The truth? I was choosing not to. There's a difference between having nothing to say and knowing when to speak. I understood timing. I understood that words lose power when they're wasted, so I saved mine. I let them believe I agreed with them. I nodded when needed. I smiled when expected. But inside, I was building a mental map of the entire operation. Who influenced whom? Who couldn't survive without validation? Who needed applause to function? Calm gave me clarity. While others reacted emotionally, I stayed steady. When tension filled the room, my heartbeat stayed slow. That scared people later, but at the time, they mistook it for weakness. They thought pressure would break me. They didn't realize pressure was teaching me. I learned how decisions were really made after meetings ended. I learned which emails mattered and which ones were just noise. I learned the value of documentation, dates, words, promises. I collected facts while they collected enemies. And the more invisible I became, the more access I had. Because no one guards themselves around someone they don't respect. That was their biggest mistake. They underestimated the power of a quiet mind. They didn't see that every insult sharpened my focus. Every dismissal trained my patience. Every smirk reminded me to stay composed. Calm is dangerous when paired with memory, and I remembered everything. I didn't need to dominate the room to control my future. I needed understanding, and calm gave me that. It allowed me to see the patterns others missed. It taught me that chaos exposes character, and character exposes weakness. I wasn't weak. I was disciplined. One day, I realized something that changed everything. They weren't winning because they were smarter. They were winning because no one was paying attention, and I was paying attention. By the time they noticed me, it was already too late. Because while they mistook calm for weakness, I turned it into my greatest weapon, and weapons don't need to be loud. They just need to be precise. They used me because I let them believe I had no limits. Extra hours, extra projects, last-minute deadlines, work no one wanted handed to me with a polite smile and an unspoken rule. Don't complain, and I didn't. Not because I enjoyed it, but because I was watching. In that office, being useful was dangerous. The more capable you were, the more invisible your effort became. And I was very capable. They praised me just enough to keep me quiet. You're so reliable. Oh, we trust you. We couldn't do this without you. Words that sounded like appreciation but paid nothing. No title, no promotion, no seat at the table, just more responsibility. And every time I accepted it, they thought they were winning. They didn't see that every task taught me something new. I learned processes no one else bothered to understand. I learned systems people took for granted. I learned how departments depended on each other, where delays really came from, and who panicked when things went wrong. While they delegated blindly, I became essential. Not visibly powerful, but quietly necessary. They thought I was desperate to please. The truth, I was gathering leverage. When you're the one doing the work, you see the gaps. You notice shortcuts, you see where rules are bent and where policies are ignored. I saw managers approve things they later denied. I saw budgets manipulated. I saw numbers adjusted to tell prettier stories. And I documented everything. Not emotionally, not angrily, calmly, patiently. I stopped expecting fairness. And that's when I started winning. They ignored my ideas in meetings, then emailed me later asking how I would handle the problem. They trusted my execution but dismissed my voice. So I gave them what they wanted on the surface, while strengthening my position underneath. I became the person who knew too much to be replaced easily. And they didn't realize that dependence cuts both ways. Being used taught me discipline. It taught me endurance. It taught me that survival in corporate spaces isn't about being liked. It's about being necessary without looking dangerous. And I mastered that balance. They thought I was stuck. I was studying the exit. Every late night showed me who never stayed. Every crisis revealed who folded under pressure. Every urgent request exposed who lacked planning. I didn't just do the work. I learned why it existed. And once you understand the why, you stop being replaceable. They assumed I needed them. They never asked if they needed me more. There's a moment when being used turns into being underestimated beyond repair. When people stop imagining you leaving. When they build systems around your presence without securing your loyalty. That's when the power quietly shifts. And they walk straight into that mistake. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my value. By the time they realized how much rested on my shoulders, they had already given me access, trust, and knowledge. They handed me the blueprint while thinking they were handing me chores. And one day, I understood something very clearly. I was no longer working for them. I was preparing to outgrow them. They used me. And without knowing it, they trained the person who would no longer accept being used again. They blocked my growth with smiles and excuses. Not this year. The budget is tight. We're not quite ready. The words changed, but the message stayed the same. Stay where you are. Do the work. Don't ask for more. And every time I heard it, I nodded calmly, like it didn't hurt, like it didn't hurt, like it didn't matter. That calm made them comfortable. They thought I accepted my place. I did. When the promotion went to someone less experienced, less prepared, and louder, I finally understood the rules of the game. Performance wasn't the problem. Positioning was. So I stopped chasing titles and started chasing leverage. I asked different questions. I took different risks. I prepared for opportunities they couldn't see coming. They thought denying me a promotion would slow me down. It focused me. I began investing in myself quietly. Certifications, skills, industry knowledge. I learned what the company needed but didn't want to pay for. I built expertise in areas no one else wanted responsibility for. Not flashy work, critical work, the kind that keeps businesses alive when things go wrong. While others celebrated job titles, I collected credibility. I started saying less and delivering more. I stopped explaining my value and let outcomes speak. When projects succeeded, my name was attached. When they failed, I already knew why. That made me dangerous in ways they didn't expect, because growth blocked in one direction forces you to grow in another. They assumed I was trapped inside their system. I was building my own. I expanded my network beyond the office. Quiet conversations, strategic relationships, people who recognize substance over noise. I learned how other companies operated, how leaders outside my workplace made decisions. And with every connection, my options multiplied. Being overlooked freed me from expectations. No one monitored my ambition because they didn't believe I had any. That gave me room to experiment, to prepare, to think long term. I wasn't climbing their ladder anymore. I was designing a better one. The day they told me a maybe next year, something clicked. Next year didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. I stopped waiting for permission. I stopped asking to be chosen. I chose myself. They thought blocking my growth meant control. What it really gave me was clarity. Clarity about my worth. Clarity about their limits. clarity about the future I wanted. By the time the opportunity appeared, the one that changed everything, I was ready in ways they never imagined. Because while they were busy protecting their positions, I was preparing to leave them behind. They didn't stop my rise. They redirected it. The shift didn't happen loudly. There was no announcement. No dramatic moment where everyone suddenly looked at me differently. Power rarely arrives with noise. It arrives quietly, almost politely. One day, people started sending me on emails they never included me in before. The next day, meetings were scheduled around my availability. And slowly, without realizing it, they began to wait. They used to decide everything without me. Now, decisions paused until I spoke. At first, they didn't understand why. They just knew things worked better when I was involved. Deadlines were met. Crises were handled. Clients stayed calm. Numbers made sense. And when something went wrong, the first question wasn't, "You messed this up." It was a, "Has she seen this yet?" That's when I felt it. The balance had shifted. The same managers who once spoke over me now asked for my opinion in front of others. The same executives who dismissed my ideas now repeated my words slowly, carefully, like they carried weight. And I watched their tone change. Less confident, more cautious, respect mixed with fear. Because dependence is uncomfortable when you didn't plan for it. They didn't promote me. They relied on me. And reliance is more powerful than a title. I noticed how their behavior changed under pressure, how voices lowered when I entered the room, how jokes stopped mid-sentence, how eyes searched my face for approval. They were no longer leading, they were reacting, and they didn't even know when it happened. They came to me privately. "How would you handle this? What do you think the risk is? Can you fix this before it reaches the board?" Each question tightened the knot. I answered calmly, professionally, never emotional, never arrogant. I gave them just enough to move forward, but not enough to replace me, because power isn't about withholding completely. It's about controlling the flow. They thought they still had authority. They didn't realize they had handed me influence. Influence. Influence is subtle. It doesn't demand, it guides, it doesn't threaten, it waits. And I waited. I watched them grow nervous as they realized how much knowledge lived with me. How many processes depended on my understanding? How many outcomes traced back to my input? They tried to regain control with friendliness, compliments, casual lunches, invitations I never received before. I accepted politely, smiled, stayed the same, because when people feel power slipping, they try to buy loyalty instead of earning it. But loyalty was never part of the deal. There was a moment I'll never forget. A senior executive, someone who once ignored my existence, looked at me during a critical discussion and said, "We'll go with whatever she recommends." The room went silent, not because of the decision, but because everyone heard it. That sentence changed everything. From that point on, they were careful around me. They knew I saw the cracks. They knew I understood the structure better than most of them. And nothing scares insecure leadership more than someone calm who understands the system. Too late, because power had already moved, not officially, not on paper, but in reality. And real power doesn't need recognition to function. It just needs dependence. I never asked for revenge. I let necessity do the work. They thought ignoring me kept me small. Instead, it placed me exactly where decisions couldn't move without me. And once you reach that point, you don't rush. You don't expose yourself. You let people feel the weight of their reliance. By the time they understood what was happening, they were already standing on ground I controlled. And they didn't know how to step back without falling. That's the moment you realize something powerful. You don't have to fight to win. You just have to wait until they need you more than you need them. I didn't leave in anger. I didn't storm out. I didn't burn bridges or raise my voice. I waited. My voice. I waited. By the time I resigned, they were comfortable. Too comfortable. They had built workflows around me. Deadlines assumed my presence. Problems quietly landed on my desk without discussion. My name wasn't on the door, but it was written all over the operation. And that's when I knew the timing was right at it. I chose my exit the same way I chose my silence. Carefully. When I submitted my resignation, I kept it simple, polite, professional. No explanations they could argue with, no emotion they could dismiss, just facts. 2 weeks' notice, a calm smile, an absolute certainty. They didn't react at first. They thought it was a negotiation. Everything in that building had always been a negotiation, but this wasn't. Meetings were called, Doors were closed. Suddenly, people who never had time for me had time. Lots of it. They asked questions they should have asked years ago. What will it take to keep you? And can we adjust your role? Is this about compensation? They searched for a lever, any lever to pull me back into place. There wasn't one, because the decision wasn't emotional. It was strategic. I had already prepared. I had options. Opportunities that didn't require me to prove myself to people who had already shown me who they were. I didn't need their validation anymore, and that realization gave me a kind of calm they couldn't understand. The office felt different after that. Tense. Unsteady. People whispered. Managers checked documentation they had never bothered to read. They realized how much lived in my head, how many processes I handled automatically, how many problems I quietly prevented from becoming disasters. They asked me to stay longer, train someone, write detailed notes. I did enough to be professional, not enough to be replaceable. Every day of my notice period felt heavier for them, lighter for me. They watched me pack my things slowly, methodically, like someone who had already moved on, because I had tea. And nothing unsettles control more than someone who is no longer afraid to lose it. On my last day, there were handshakes, forced smiles, compliments that came years too late. You were always so valuable. We didn't realize how much you handled, words that meant nothing now. Value recognized after departure is just regret in disguise. I walked out without looking back. Weeks later, I heard what happened. Projects stalled. Deadlines slipped. Clients complained. Meetings dragged on without answers. They didn't collapse, but they felt it every day. In small ways that added up, in the silence where my efficiency used to be, that was the final lesson. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it resigns. I didn't take anything from them. I took myself. And that was the one thing they never thought they'd lose. If this story spoke to you, don't scroll away. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been ignored, used, or made to feel small, this channel is for you. Hit like if you believe silence can be power. Subscribe if you know patience beats noise. And share this story with someone who's being tested right now. Because remember this, they don't fear loud people. They fear the calm ones who are watching, learning, and preparing. Stay with us. More stories are coming.